Houston, we have a podcast. You're listening to the premier Rockets podcast. It's H-Town Hoops, hosted by Brandon Scott and Adam Spolane.
It is the H-Town Hoops podcast. I am Brandon Scott here with Adam Spolane, Austin Mendez producing this thing for us. And we are coming to you in between the Cavs games. Let's just call it in between the home and home that the Rockets and Cavs are doing. And if you've been paying attention, you saw the first Cavs game at Toyota Center. Our guy Adam Spolane was in attendance for the game. And we can actually start there. Like, we haven't talked since the back-to-back Memphis games. And so now we're talking in the middle of back-to-back Cavs games. And them winning those Memphis games we thought was about as close to maybe not a seminal moment, but a really good sign for the team. Since then, they've played the Kings, they've played the Blazers, Denver. Yeah, they've played Denver and, of course, the Pistons, and then this Cavs game. But for me, man, I just want to pick up on the Cleveland game real quick because it was such a moment. I felt like I didn't feel like they deserved to win that game until like they actually had won that game. Like, I thought they had done everything, at least at the very end with the Tari Eason foul on Darius Garland. Like, I thought that was kind of giving the game away. But up until that point, I was encouraged by the fact that they were as competitive with the Cavs as they were. As somebody who was in attendance for the game and was very much aware of the different swings that this game had, how did you take it in? Because I thought it was an overall good sign, even if they weren't supposed to win that game in that wild finish with Darius Garland missing those free throws at the end.
Yeah, I mean, you take the win when you can get them. I mean, especially when you are in the position that they're in and they're second in the West and you're trying to hold on to that, you take any win that you can get. It's not a win that you're like necessarily like proud about just because you didn't necessarily win it the way you want to win games. And like, they did a lot of things well. They did a lot of things well that they want to be able to do well. They want to be able to get a lot of offensive rebounds. They got a million. I think their offensive rebound rate was over 50% in last night's game. They want to force turnovers. They did a pretty good job of that. But they also did some stuff that you just cannot do. And they got away with it last night, but a lot of times you're not going to. And 22 turnovers leading to 33 points, you're not going to win games doing that very often. Giving up 25 second chance points, that's not something that you're going to be able to do and get away with most times. And then, like, you brought up the Eason play, the foul on the three by Garland. Like, that's not a turnover, but that's just like sloppy. That's just like a sloppy closeout that you have to know better. You have to know how to be able to close out on that type of a shot because you're going to have those all throughout the year. And you look at the way Easton closed out on his on Garland, and then you look at how Amen Thompson did it twice on Donovan Mitchell. He did it with I think it was 11 seconds left, where Mitchell takes the long two from above the arc, and then he took the last shot from the corner. Like, Thompson's ability to contest that without fouling, huge. Easton's inability to contest that shot without fouling almost cost them the game. So there's some things that you can learn. Take the win, be happy with it, but man, they got some stuff to clean up.
Yeah, for me, the big thing with the Eason play was just situationally. Like, that's a bad play at any point in the game. Like, first quarter, second quarter, third quarter, first possession, last possession, game on the line, blowout. It doesn't matter the context of the game. That's a bad play. And then of course it ends up becoming a flagrant because he was that reckless and not giving the shooter any space to land. And so, like, that's an awful play in any context, but especially at that point when you've got the game in hand, if you maybe not in hand, but basically in hand, if you don't foul the shooter there, like it's really basically the only thing you can't do in that situation is foul the 3-point shooter in that scenario. And to do it at the end of the game was really disappointing, especially from somebody like Tari Eason, who was a big part of them being in that game. Like, and I know we'll get to this, but the energy that I feel like he and Cam Whitmore were able to give them off the bench, especially early in the game, or in the first half was vital, and throughout the game really was vital. And for it to kind of be soured with that and potentially to cost them the game, and the fact that it didn't is to me just funny and ironic and not deserving for the Rockets. But of course, like you said, you'll take it however you can get it. But it was all the more disappointing to not understand situationally how this kills you even more now than it would in any other point in the game, because it gives them the free throws and the ball. Like you're giving points and taking away a possession.
Yeah, you just have to contest at an angle. Like, that's the big thing. Contest from the side. And that's what Thompson was able to do on both of his, and that's what Eason wasn't able to do. Again, they survived it. And it doesn't take away some of the really good things that Eason did in the game. It doesn't take away that he's played well since he's come back. I think it's now 3 games that he's played since coming back. It doesn't take away from that, but you're going to be in that situation many, 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 many times the remainder of this season. And you remember Oklahoma City had its season end because of a foul on a contest like that. So, and that wasn't a landing space call. That was hitting a guy on the arm. But like, these are the things that you have to be able to do, because they're going to call those. Like, those fouls are going to get called. And so for Eason, it's a learning opportunity for him. Fortunately, it's a learning opportunity in a win. You'd rather have that than the learning opportunity in a loss. He was really good in the game. He brought them back. The starters were not very good. Kind of second straight game, the starters have gotten them off to a slow start. But he and Cam Whitmore did a really nice job of riding the ship towards the end of the first quarter and getting them a big lead in the first quarter. But then I come back to, they're up by 8 at the end of the first half, and they should have been up by, at least thinking of Ime Udoka, they should have been up by 18. So they beat a really good team last night, the team with the best record in the league. It was a weird game. It was a game where they were shorthanded. Both teams are really shorthanded, so you don't learn a lot really from either. But there's some room to work on some stuff there.
I like this attitude, man. This attitude of, hey, you won a game, but you know you weren't supposed to win the game. You beat a good team, you'll take it. You won't necessarily complain about getting a win, but there's no fool's gold here. There's no lying to yourself about how that game ended. And even the beginning of it, as you just point out, how they could have been up 18 or should have been up way more than they were earlier in the game. But I did somehow, though, I still came away from it. And I'm talking about before the foul, before the Eason foul on Garland. Okay. I was still in a space of, this is overall a really good showing because of who the Cavs are. And I understand they're shorthanded. They don't have everybody that night. But the Cavs, the best shooting team in the NBA, right? And they also contest at a very high level, right? So they're a really good defensive team as well. And for the Rockets to be able to play through that, I thought to me, it was a little bit more of validation, as we talked about, or as we talked about the last time we were on, in what they were able to do against Memphis. And whenever they're piling up, stacking up these wins against quality opponents, or really just quality showings against quality opponents, I'm typically encouraged by that. Okay, it's like, earlier in the season, we were trying to figure out, okay, how real is this? Them being kind of a playoff contender, now being number 2 in the West. We did a segment on, are they really as good as their record says they are? And to me, these are the types of performances, again, up until the Tari Eason foul. Those are the type of performances that make you say, you know what? Yeah, they are real, because we do feel like Cleveland, even if you're not necessarily sold on that, the proof is in the pudding there. They're clearly the best team in the East, or among them, and they are record-wise. And if this is how the Rockets are playing against one of the best teams in the West is playing against one of the best teams in the East, you have to feel good about what you're seeing being real, and not trying to. I feel like a lot of us are waiting on the regression to the mean, because the Rockets still don't have that bona fide superstar, and they have been through what they've been through over the last few seasons, and it's been a long time since we've seen them be this good. But it looks like, this game was another example where I'm like, you know what? No, this is not perfect. They got a lot of flaws. They got a lot of issues. Like you mentioned, they needed their bench to come and give them the spark that was required for them to really compete in this game. But it's just a different kind of team, like it's a win by committee, win by effort. We don't have knockdown shooters, but we've got athletes, and we will outrun and outwork you and outjump you and out rebound you. It's still the, even with some of the slippage, it's still the best rebounding team in the league. Like I just still felt good about what the game was saying about them, even with all of their mistakes and flaws.
Yeah, especially through three quarters. I thought through three quarters, that's probably, even with some of the miscues that they had, like, you'll take that. Be up to be up against that team by whatever it was, 8 or 9, maybe it might have even been 11 points through three quarters. That was really good, and they shot the ball well. The fourth quarter was ugly. The fourth quarter was really ugly. 7 turnovers in the quarter. I don't know what they wound up shooting as a team in the quarter, but the Cavs went to a zone, and the Rockets had some trouble fighting their way through it, and that's going to happen. But hey, you won the game, and you look at it now. You're 43 games into the season, and you're 4 games up on home court advantage in the first round. You're 6 games up on a top 6 seed. You're 8 games up in the loss column on the play-in. So, like, it's another win. It's another game off the schedule, and you're a step closer to making the playoffs.
Yeah, I thought Fred VanVleet did a good job of describing it on the post-game show or on the post-game interview courtside with Vanessa Richardson, when he said it was a display by both teams of how not to finish a game. Yeah. That's probably the better takeaway from the game, is that for two teams that are supposed to be in the mix late in the season, one team's the number 1 seed in the East and the other one's the number 2 seed in the West, and so they're supposed to be, in theory, contenders. They put on an epic display of how you don't close out a game if you're supposed to be a serious basketball team. I would say, I feel like we can, like most people can probably agree on that.
It kind of reminded me of the U of H Central Florida game on Saturday, where it's a 1-point game with 1.1 seconds to go, and you had 3 turnovers in the last 1.1 seconds of the game. That's kind of what last night reminded me of, to a certain degree.
Well, just right before we started recording, I'm watching the first half of Milwaukee and Miami, and Khalil Ware throws the ball away, and Damian Lillard ends up scoring 6 points in like 1 second, or 6 points in 2 seconds, or something ridiculous like that to end the first half. So
sounds like Khalil Indiana.
Yeah, right. Yeah, and it's like, how many different ways can a team find a way to beat itself? But speaking of, I think this is a good way to transition into something that you wrote on sportsradio610.com, and I would encourage everyone who's listening or watching right now, and of course you can listen to the H-Town Hoops podcast wherever you get your podcast, and watch us on the Sports Radio 610 YouTube feed. But you wrote that Ime Udoka, and obviously talked about this, but Ime Udoka believes that the Rockets have veered away from what made them the second team in the West, or the number 2 seed in the West. Explain what you mean by that, as we encourage people to go actually read what you mean by that.
So here, I'll just lay it out like this. Through the first 32 games of the season, so this takes you through December 31st. They were second in defense. Their defensive rating was 106. They were 12th. They were 11th in offense with a 112.5 offensive rating. Since January 1st, the Rockets are now 12th in defense. The defensive rating is 7.4 points higher than it was before January 1st. Offensive rating is up by almost 6 points. So they have gotten better offensively, but in doing so, they have gotten worse defensively. And you could kind of feel it a little bit, and I'll give you kind of the answer to what Udoka gave, but one of the things that you could kind of feel last night is they're shooting the ball really well, and the shooting has gotten a lot better here in recent weeks. And I think sometimes when you do shoot the ball well, you almost like start to get comfortable with everything else, and you lose your focus on some of the other things. You lose your focus on the defensive end of the floor. You lose your focus when it comes to cleaning up on the defensive glass. You start to get a little bit more careless with the basketball because the possessions don't mean as much, because you're making shots at a much higher rate than you were making them earlier in the year. And so as the offense gets better, then all of a sudden you don't start to defend the way that you normally want to defend. And that was kind of the point of, they were up 8 at halftime against Cleveland, and it felt like they should have been up by a whole lot more, except they were turning the ball over. They were giving up second chance points. And Udoka's like bringing that up at halftime, and it didn't work. And all the things that they screwed up to not be able to put the Cavs away early in that game, they continued to do later on. And again, it almost cost them that game. And the quote from Udoka that I thought was kind of the good way to put it is, quote, "I think when it's up and down and you're scoring at ease, sometimes you let go of what made you really good." Uh, and what made this team really good wasn't the offense. It wasn't the getting up and down the floor. It wasn't the scoring, points at a high rate. It was defending, and it was getting after it at that end of the floor. And when your defensive rating goes from 106 to 112 and a half or whatever I said it was, that kind of goes to show you that defensively you've taken a step back. And some of it can be with the guys being hurt. And listen, they were without Tari Eason for a good stretch of January. They were without Amen Thompson for a couple of games in January. They were without Dylan Brooks. I think he might have missed a game this month. They've been without Jabari Smith here for a little bit. But that's not a reason for you to drop off that big defensively. And so I do think that they didn't practice today. They're going to practice tomorrow. They're going to practice Friday. We're doing this on Thursday, so they're going to practice on Friday. I do think as you get into Cleveland and then you got a game in Boston, I think that you're really going to see a focus with them trying to get back to the way that they defended at the start of the year. Because again, these guys were second in the West because they were second in defense. That has fallen off. Like they're not going to be a great offensive team. They don't have those types of guys that are going to make them an elite offensive team. They do have the guys that can be an elite defensive team. And I think that's what Udoka really wants them to get back to is let's clean up some of this stuff at the defensive end of the floor. They were a little bit better yesterday. Again, first shot defense, really good. But you still have to be able to clean things up on the glass. And when you give up 25 second chance points, like that's one of the things that they really need to clean up because their second chance points allowed has gone up. It's gone up. It hasn't gone up a lot, but it's gone up a little bit. And then points off turnovers, which again, those were issues for them last night. That sort of stuff has gone up. They were, I think they were fourth in allowing points off turnovers and maybe 12th in allowing second chance points. And they're now out in these last 11 games or so. They are out of the top 10 in points off turnovers allowed. And I think they're down to 18th in second chance points allowed. So, like, these are the little things that they need to be able to clean up.
Yeah, this is funny to talk about, or like kind of fascinating to talk about, of like, not resting on your laurels or not getting too comfortable. Like to me, what's interesting about it is like them not being a good offensive team is, and I think they were going to be good defensively because that's part of just their principles and what they emphasize. But they were able to, I guess, generate a lot of offense through their frenetic defensive style, right? Like, and like you said, that's what helped allow them to be what they've been so far and to be such a unique team. But then the idea that, hey, now that we're hitting shots, we don't need to get after it as much on the defensive end. It's like, no, you got to keep that desperation on the defensive side of the ball or on the defensive end of the floor, I should say, and then marry that with like it wasn't supposed to be, hey, we start shooting the ball better and we can take a step back defensively. I thought it was always supposed to be like, man, look at how they defend. I can't wait until Fred VanVleet starts knocking down shots. I can't wait till Jalen Green starts knocking down shots. And then, of course, that starts to happen. Can't wait until Cam Whitmore until they find a role for Cam Whitmore, so on and so forth. Tari Eason stays healthy, and you're like, okay, now they got an offensive groove, and you marry that with what they've already got going on the defensive side. And that should give you something. The idea that is disappointing that they would, corresponding with their better offensive play, that somehow they would allow the defense to start to lack. But of course, these are things that have to come together. And good on Udoka for bringing it up. It is hard though to wrap my mind around. Like, it's got to be like a team defense thing, because I still watch guys out there who I feel like are defending well. So I'm trying to figure out like the source of this. Like Amen Thompson, dude had 4 steals the other night. 4 steals. If I'm not mistaken, I think he had 4 steals on top of his, what was it, 16 and 16. or something like that. Dylan Brooks, obviously a stellar defender. Jalen Green, his defense has been, I think, for the most part, exceptional since the very beginning of the season. Since the very from said go all the way up until now, even when his shot wasn't falling, I feel like his defensive effort has been encouraging, and he's been a productive defender for them from what I've been able to tell. I'm trying to figure out exactly how is it the injuries? Is it actually losing focus? Or is it like this Cavs game? I was charging a lot of that, except for the second chance points part. There's no excuse for not rebounding. But I'm like, hey man, this team shoots better than anybody else in the league. They're gonna outshoot you. They're gonna be hard to defend, But yeah, man, I guess I'm trying to figure out the source of that and the real reason for that and how that comes to be, because they still got really good defenders on the team, even with everybody in and out the way that you mentioned.
Yeah, but remember, you got to defend. You're defending basically 100 possessions a game. And so you can bring up the possessions with the 4 steals, and you can bring up, this and that. You still got to defend 100 possessions. It feels like they aren't defending the paint real well. I don't know if the numbers bear that out, but that's kind of one thing that has kind of felt different to me. But the thing is, when your offense is better, it should make your defense better, because teams are having to play in the half court a whole lot more, and they're having to walk the ball up, and it allows your defense to be able to get back, as opposed to, when you're shooting 23% from 3 and teams are getting long rebounds and outlets and all that sort of stuff, and they can play a little bit faster. So I think that's been the surprising aspect of this, is that normally when your offense is better, your defense gets better, but for them, it's kind of gone the other way, where the offense has gotten better and the defense has gotten worse.
Yeah, and I also wonder too how much of it has to do with, like, obviously they've added veterans over the last couple of years, like Fred VanVleet and Dylan Brooks, and we know what they mean to the team. Steven Adams is playing this year, but it is still a team with relatively young guys. And look, we're gonna run out of time to be able to make that excuse, because the oldest of the young guys are now in what, year 4. Like it's. Like these young guys are getting a lot of experience and a lot of burn, and pretty soon are not going to be all of that young. But my point is, I wonder how much of that has to do with just learning how to win,
Yeah,
like
that's
just
probably
learning how to become a winning team and what winning really entails. It's not just defending, it's not just making shots, but it's whenever you're doing one that you make, whenever you're having high success at one, that you don't neglect the other. Like that to me, I guess, is part of the process of learning how to win, probably, right?
Yeah, I don't think that's wrong. But they don't play rookies anymore. They're in a single rookie that's getting minutes for this team right now, which is a far cry from what you've said the last 3-4 years, when it was a lot of rookies. Now it's a much more experienced group now than it has been in the past. I do expect. Listen, over the course of a long season, things are going to fall through the cracks. That's just how it goes. It is hard to maintain the same level for 82 games. I think that's the challenge of the season. And let's see. I'll be really interested to see. And listen, the challenge here over this road trip is going to be really. It's a really tough road trip when you look at Cleveland again, Boston, Atlanta. I think there's another Memphis game in there. I think there might be a Minnesota game that's mixed up in there as well. Like, this is a really hard schedule to get your defense like back on track, but I'll be interested to see if they can do it, especially in Boston.
What do you think of, and we've mentioned Eason, of course, he had the boneheaded foul at the end, but is just, I mean, the energy that he brings and the defensive versatility, like, it's just, he's the type of player that you just want to be on your team. Tari Eason and Cam Whitmore, they don't win the game and they're not in the game without those guys. And I want to be even more specific with this. You tell me if I'm crazy. Like, I don't I don't want Amin Thompson to come off the floor. Like, I like him in some kind of like trio with Jalen Green and Alperen Sengun as starters. But I love what it looks like with him and Tari Eason and Cam Whitmore out there as well, kind of just like forcing the issue a little bit athletically. What do you think about this? First of all, really, Eason and Whitmore and the job that they did on Wednesday, and really like what they bring to this team as a bench combo. I really feel like when when Whitmore is like, I guess you kind of have to take what he is as a player and accept some of the pitfalls of his game, but the upside of it, the pros of it are right there for you. And with him and Eason out there, to me, that is a hell of a bench combo. What did you think about watching them? What have you thought about watching them out there?
Well, I guess with Whitmore, the pros are if you are struggling for offense, he can come in and give you 10 points in the span of like 5 minutes.
Yeah,
that's hard to do, and I think you saw this really. I guess that's probably a big part of the first quarter last night is that they're down. Those two came in. I think the Rockets were down 7, or they were down 9, and then all of a sudden, they outscore Cleveland by 16 in the rest of the first quarter. Like those two were a big reason for it. With Eason, you know what you're getting. You are going to get a guy who's going to come out and defend and be disruptive and make plays at that end of the floor. You hope he makes shots. He's been better with that here. He's been a bit of a better playmaker here this season since he's come back. But you know what you're getting. With Whitmore, you don't know. Whitmore can shoot 8 of 10, or he can shoot 2 for 12. You really don't know. And just the thing with Whitmore is that you need him to make smart. You need the decision making to be there for Whitmore, and there are times when it's not there. And there was one play, there was one kind of moment specifically last night where he takes a bad 3 and then he gambles on an outlet trying to go for a steal, and it leads to a wide open 3. I think it was for Garland. I can't remember who it was. And Udoka immediately has to call timeout. Like those are the things with Whitmore that you've got to avoid. Like you can't have the gambling. And you can do it sometimes, but you have to know kind of your surroundings on the floor.
He's out of control. That's
Yes.
the issue. He's out of control, and the benefit of having him out there is just because he's supremely talented.
Yeah.
So out of control, in control, he can go out there and get a bucket. But at the same time, the exact thing that you just painted out there or illustrated there is like you need him to be in control. Like he can't just be flying like a bat out of hell. Just because he's athletic or just because he's talented, because if you gamble and you miss, then you're obviously leaving your team high and dry.
Yeah, so that's one of the things, and that's going to impact his ability to stay on the floor. Listen, he's playing right now because they have been a little bit shorthanded, but when they get Jabari back, that might crunch things a little bit. So I'll be interested to see if he's able to stay on the floor, if they go out and get another guard at the trade deadline. What happens there, or if they sign a guy, on the buyout market, they have an open roster spot. So listen, I do think that he's gotten better with this stuff over the last couple of months, since the season started, since he came back from the G League. But there are those moments where it goes off the rails. There was a possession on Thursday in Sacramento, the last possession of the third quarter. He just dribbled the ball for a good 23 seconds, and they don't get a good shot off, and like he didn't move the ball at all. Like you got to be able to, like you can't have those types of possessions in that type of a situation, and because every possession really matters. And so like those are the things that he really has to get better at. He's shown some improvement, but has he shown enough improvement for him to be able to play when the rotation really starts to tighten as we get towards the end of the year and towards the playoffs? Or is he just a guy where, hey, they're in a hole, they need someone who can come in and provide them a spark to dig out of a hole, and then, hey, we're not going to see you for the next game? So I'm curious to see how that works, because he is a guy who can come off the bench and provide you some instant offense on a team that at times does struggle to find offense. But then there are the negatives to him.
Yeah, and to me, it seems like you got to kind of do your best to rein it in as best you can, but also that you're going to have to live with some of this, because it just kind of seems to be a like a characteristic or
But it's what makes him really good.
Yeah,
it's kind of that when you have certain players like that, you have to take the good with the bad.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes the good is going to be really good and the bad is going to be really bad. But there are also going to be times where the bad outweighs the good, and you just can't have that on the floor. So far here in the last month or so, the good has outweighed the bad, but you still see the bad creep up every now and then, and that's what keeps you off the floor sometimes.
Yeah, this is just a working theory. I haven't looked at the numbers to see like what the lineups dictate or what they say about this. But to me, it's just something about having Amen Thompson out there that helps everything. Just because he can do so many different things. And to me, what his presence does is allows everyone else on the floor to do very much specifically what it is that they do. Like when Amen Thompson is on the floor, I feel like everybody else doesn't have to do too much or doesn't have to jump outside of themselves because there is this particular guy. And I'm not trying to make him out to be, Magic Johnson or whatever it is. But because he does so many different things well and so many different things at a high level, I feel like when you play with him, you can just go out there and do your job. If your job is to go out there and cook, then go out there and cook. Be a chef. You don't have to cook and clean and, like try to figure out everything else. So I don't know. I think that's why I like, or am at least intrigued by Cam Whitmore when he's out there with, another bit high, high energy guy in Tari Eason, but also specifically Amen Thompson, who does a lot of different things well. And maybe either, like I said, allows other players to do what they do, or just compensates for the things that the other guys are lacking, the things that they don't do well. Well, here comes Amen Thompson flying like a bat out of hell, and he can block the shot, or he can get the steal, or he can guard the best player, or whatever it is, So I don't know. I want to see more of it. I am glad, and everything that we talked about is true. Like, it's undeniable that this dude's got flaws in his game, Cam Whitmore. And really, you talk about it, keeping him off the floor. It's also the reason why his minutes have to be limited anyway. I feel like, because you can't just have that out there for too long. But I am glad that they have carved out or figured out, or maybe just circumstances dictated, that he have a role on this team, because I always thought that he should. I always thought that there was a space for a dude that can come in and microwave that thing. You know what I mean? A dude that can come in, like you said, get you 10 points in 6 minutes if you need it, because they weren't a good enough offensive team. So like that was something that I thought they were lacking early on, and was hoping that Cam Whitmore, they would find a role for him. And it seems like they have, as long as they can kind of just keep that tamed a little bit, right? Keep it reeled in, but also do that without taking away from what makes him what brought him here, what makes him a special talent.
Yeah, it'll just be interesting once they get back to full strength, and when they do shorten, because they're going to shorten the rotation once you get to the playoffs. That's just how this goes. It's hard to play 9-10 guys once you get to the playoffs, but when that does happen, what does his role then become? Because they tried to play 10 at the start of the year, and that was including Reed Shepherd, who's now no longer playing. But a big reason why it was Whitmore on the outside after the first couple of weeks of the year was because other guys weren't getting enough minutes. So if you're playing 9, then does that mean that Amen Thompson only plays 36 minutes instead of 39 minutes? Or Van Vliet, does that, you know what I mean? So every minute that somebody else is on the floor, it takes minutes away from one of your best guys. So I'll be really interested to see how that looks. Obviously, we're not going to talk about this today, but it is a conversation that we will wind up having here in the next month, is just how does the starting lineup look once Jabari Smith does come back? Because I think that's a really difficult decision that they have to make. That starting lineup has performed really well with each other, and it fits really well with each other. And they like some of the matchups that you're able to have with that starting lineup. But it also is hard for me to imagine that Amen Thompson goes back to the bench in a month when Jabari Smith comes back. So I don't know what they're going to do there. It gets into a couple of really tough conversations that they're going to have.
Adam, we had this conversation in the last episode, and we definitely talked about this, and it's something that I feel like is, you almost don't want to overtalk it, because to me it looms large. It's one of the biggest, aside from, can they really be the number 2 seed, or how do you see things playing out this season? Some of the more generic type of stuff that you could talk about. It is in terms of specific questions and talking points for the Rockets, it's pretty high up there, man. Like I think about it every time I watch them play. I'm like, man, what is this gonna look like exactly? How do they navigate it? Ime Udoka does not strike me as much of a politician or anything like he is. I feel like gonna do whatever he feels is the most pragmatic thing. So it's not gonna be like, oh, this guy can't lose his job to injury, or I don't feel like it's gonna be any of that. I think he's gonna try to make the best decision that he feels like is there. But what I was saying in our previous episode, Adam, and I'll say it here, and I'm pretty sure I'll say it whenever we talk about this again, is that this is not a knock on Jabari Smith. And I don't think it has to be about him losing his job as much as what you just mentioned. The way it is now fits perfectly. And not only that, but Jabari himself is a good enough plug and play type of player. He shoots and he plays defense and he's tall. You know, like there's always going to be a spot for him on the floor. You can just insert him into the game. He can play in any lineup. Okay, he can play in any rotation, and you just integrate him into your rotation, like without putting him in the starting lineup. You just find some minutes for him because there are going to be minutes for tall people who play defense and shoot. So I don't think it's got to be, it's a talking point and it's interesting, but I don't feel like it's got to be this big, dramatic thing of, oh, Jabari is losing his spot and what, I don't think it has to be that. I think he can still come in there and be a very productive player for them off the bench and as just a plug and play 3-and-D stretch, small ball 5, that type of thing. So like to me, it feels like it should be simple to me. But of course, that's just me talking because I ain't the one that's got to make the decision, and it ain't my career we're talking about. So sure, easy for me to say, but I feel like it should be fairly simple once they have to cross that bridge.
So I want to try something here. I asked Udoka before yesterday's game, like, are there areas where you can really feel Jabari's absence? Like, are there areas where, like, man, you can tell we don't have Jabari? I want to play you his answer. I think that it'll work. I'm not 100% sure. So tell me if you can hear it or not. And then I want you to tell me, does this sound like somebody who is ready to take Jabari Smith Jr. out of the Rockets starting lineup? So here's the answer to that question. And again, the question is, are there areas where you really felt like where you've missed Jabari's absence over the last 9 games?
Rebounding numbers have gone down. I think he was improving in offensive glass, but also being a big body down there on the defensive glass has really hurt us some. I think we moved some matchups around and have them in and some different guys on the guards now. That's affected a little bit the rebounding numbers. That's a piece of what Jabari had really improved in. The versatility and the shooting, I think we're okay there. We're making up for some of that in a different way, scoring with different way of pace that I'm in plays with. But it's just throws everything off a little bit. And the defensive glass has been the main thing that's showed so far.
Could you hear that?
Yeah. No, I can hear it, and no, it sounds like that he's got tremendous value in rebounding and being tall. And
nope, but you know what? You know what stood out to me though. But yeah, it's just everything's a little bit off. It's when he said that it's everything is just a little bit off. That's the part of the answer that where I kind of perked up, where it's just like I know they played well during this stretch. They played okay. They've had better stretches this season, but nothing. It just doesn't feel the way that it felt early in the year. Some of the rotations are off. Some of the substitution patterns are just a little bit off. That's what stood out to me, and that's what makes me think. Now, this doesn't mean that Amen Thompson is going back to the bench, but it does make me feel like they're going to stick Jabari back in the starting lineup whenever he does come back.
Yeah, and look, I know I've heard a lot of fans talk about this, or seen, I shouldn't say heard, but seen a lot of fans talk about this online, and a lot of the response is people that want Dillon Brooks to go to the bench. I don't think that's happening, but it does create sort of this fascinating dynamic because Şengün's is arguably their best player. He's not going to the bench. Dillon Brooks is a wildly veteran at this point. I know he just turned 29. I was shocked to see. I was like, surely Dillon Brooks has to be older than 29 by now, but yeah, apparently he just turned 29. He's not going to the bench. Obviously, Fred VanVleet, you can argue, is their most important player because they don't have a point guard that plays at nearly as high of a level of point guard as he does. And of course, Jalen Green, the way he's been playing, save for, I guess the most recent game, is not going to the bench. So like, there's only 5. You can't start 6.
Yeah.
You can only start 5. And so who's it gonna be? Who's that guy gonna be? It makes sense for it to just be the guy that they inserted into the lineup for Jabari, right? But the problem is, and we also talked about this in the last episode, and you brought this point up, Adam. He is not so slowly becoming their best player. Like, a year from now, it'll probably be undeniable that he's their best player. Certainly, a couple of years from now, he's on that trajectory. If it continues the way it's been looking. So, what do you do with that? That's why I say, and when you talk about everything being off, well, that could fix it. It just doesn't have to be him in the starting lineup. Him being a part of your rotation. Say you're subbing him in instead of whoever it is, Aaron Holiday or maybe Steven. And I know Steven Adams is giving them some solid minutes, but maybe it's that. Maybe it's Cam Whitmore, somebody who's getting minutes is not going to, and he's going to make sense in any rotation. So I think that part will help, that there is no bad lineup. There is no bad rotation for Jabari Smith. He can play with any combination of the players on the team at any point in the game. And I think that's a luxury, and they'll take advantage of that. But that does not mean that they got to reinsert him into the starting lineup. I don't think that that's 100% necessary unless they feel like it's that off, that the continuity of Jabari in the starting lineup just makes more sense for them. And maybe Thompson is still in the point in his career where taking that seat back again is not out of the question. But man, dude, the longer this lasts, like 16, and 4 steals. I mean, come on, like the guy just, and I'm just giving one example there. Like the guy just every game is impacting the game. That's the issue, right? Is that as good as valuable of a piece as Jabari Smith is to this team, there's nobody on the team that affects the game in as many ways as Thompson does. It just is a matter of fact. He it's not just stat stuff in either. It's these areas of the game that he plays at the very least a good level, and in some cases an exceptionally high level. And they don't have anybody else like that, Jabari included. It's not really Jabari's fault. It's just more, to me, a credit to the young kid, to Amen Thompson.
I think Brooks is going to the bench.
Do you think Brooks is?
I'm calling my shot. I think it's going to be Brooks. I think that the Thompson and Brooks skill set, they kind of match one another, probably closer than anybody else within the other 4 in that starting lineup. And I think that's going to be what sends Brooks to the bench. And I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing, because I think then, for Brooks, he then just gets to become this physical, use up all 6 fouls type defender. So I think it's going to wind up being Brooks to the bench.
Well, I will say this. I like that you called your shot on that, because I do think, and this is something that the Rockets will benefit from, I don't get the sense that there's an ego problem, that, like, you know what I mean? That, like, there's somebody that's just going to be like, hey, man, you can't take this guy out of the guys that, let me preface this, out of the guys that are actual candidates to go to the bench, right? And those, to be clear, I think are Jabari when he comes back, coming off the bench, Amen Thompson going back to the bench, or Dylan Brooks, as you just suggested. Out of those 3 guys, I don't see any of the 3 guys making a big stink about it. Just offhand, and I know you're around them a lot more than I am, but that's my sense of it. That will be, it's going to be a tough decision, but it should be an easy transition, if that makes sense. I think that makes sense, and I think you're right too in terms of who probably should go to the bench. If you can get Jabari back and just replace, like the thing about Dylan Brooks is he's supposed to be your best perimeter defender, right? Well, guess what? That's somebody else now.
Yeah.
So there you go. I like that. I like you calling that shot. that's the part that I didn't know if because the team is so young, if they still really just value the experience and the fact that Dylan Brooks and Fred VanVleet are the two guys out of the ones that play a lot. They're the two guys that have played meaningful games before, And so I just didn't know if how much that would factor in. But if we're just talking about mano a mano, or like you said, the position mirroring each other in terms of the skill set, give me the guy who is a little bit younger and a lot more athletic and can also lock down the other team's best player, really, of any size. So interesting, man. Dude, I love how we were like, we're not gonna talk about this today.
Then we just did 15 minutes.
And then we just did 15. But again, I said this when you said that. It is something worth talking about really until it happens, because and each game I guess is a data point in, okay, so would they rather this or that, to just kind of compare it and think about it. So man, this is a fun thought exercise. We'll see how things look if they're a little less sloppy against the Cavs in this Saturday game. I'm really interested to see how the back end of this home and home goes, because they won the game, but can acknowledge it, and we have here on this podcast, but we're able to acknowledge the clear and obvious that they perhaps shouldn't have won the game, and they did not win the game in the fashion that they want to win. Even if I was looking at it like, damn, look at them competing against the Cavs. I'll be damned. These try-hard Rockets have actually become somebody,
And remember, this is also a decision that they won't have to make for a while. I mean, it's 3 weeks since Jabari Smith broke his hand or fractured the left metacarpal, the fourth metacarpal in his left hand. They said that this was a 4 to 8 week injury, and this is when they thought he was going to have surgery. So the timeline is it's a little longer now because he's not going to need to have surgery. So we got a while before you really have to start thinking about it. But when he said everything feels a little off, that's kind of, to me, that's what made me think, hey, you know what? They might just put Jabari right back in the starting lineup, just so that everything doesn't feel quite off.
Yeah, that's it. That is interesting. I got to give it to you. That is interesting. Everything feels a little off. And how does Jabari Smith kind of help them get things back on track? Because what's funny is that we would highlight that quote in the midst of everybody else. It seems like there's this revelation of how Amen Thompson has come in and fixed everything, and excuse me, I think there's a lot to that. He's obviously a fantastic player, but yeah, but there's this other side of it. It's probably more to the story than that. All right, so they got the Cavs on Saturday. Hell of a road trip here. Cavs on Saturday, Celtics on Monday. They got the Hawks. They're at Atlanta on Tuesday, and then they close the month out at Memphis. And of course, they've already handled business against Memphis, so this is kind of a formality, but it's also a national TV game. That's going to be a TNT game against Memphis on the 30th, or at Memphis on the 30th, excuse me. So we're going to come back to you guys in between that. Let's do that. That Wednesday, the 29th. Let's talk then, after they have played the Cavs for the second time on the back end of that home and home, and those two road games against the Celtics and the Hawks, and see what the Rockets are talking about then. Make sure that you are subscribed to the H-Town Hoops podcast wherever it is that you get your podcast. Make sure that you are subscribed to the Sports Radio 610 YouTube page, where this podcast also appears in video form. Subscribe, review, tell a friend, all of that. And until next time, he's Adam Spolane, Austin Mendez producing this thing for us. Y'all be good.